Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, Emil, thanks for coming. Congratulations, by the way. For those who don't know, Emil, startup founder, recently just raised a nice seed round. And he's helping folks get back to work. So, um, yeah, maybe how about we just kind of jump in? I know a little bit about your story from online, so but maybe you could let folks know. You went to Miami University, right? Or
I did. Yeah. Oh, cool. Did you go to Miami as well? Okay, cool. Okay, I graduated in 24, so we probably had a decent amount of overlap then. Um, cool. Well, yeah. My entrepreneurship story started about 5 years ago. Freshman year of Miami, I was class of 2020, so I guess 5.5 years ago now, which just makes me feel really old.
Mm.
But I started a TikTok services business when I was 18, so my freshman year of college. And this was a time when TikTok as a platform was just blowing up. So we did a lot of work with companies, helping them connect with young people on TikTok, helping them connect with college students. Nike was a client, Kroger was a client, P&G ended up growing that business. And then right around the point where we hit, about 50 people and started doing like presidential campaigns and like celebrity work, I realized I was in over my head for a 20-year-old, and then sold the business to a private equity. So sold the business for $7.5 million my junior year of college. Was not really sure what to do next because I was like the sole owner of the business, and I was like, I should probably go get like a job. But at the same time, like it doesn't make sense to get like a regular job. But I also don't want to retire at 21. So had a few interesting conversations and found myself working in government for a little bit of time. So worked around certain presidential campaigns, worked in government for a little bit, really learned a lot. And the biggest lesson was that I realized that our government is probably the biggest enterprise customer on the planet. As a country, we spend $3 trillion a year, which is crazy to think about. That's the same as the capex of the 10 largest companies on the Fortune 500 list. And like, we don't even think about it. And yet, so few companies and startups try to build to solve the problems of government or try to solve government's problems. So started with this idea of what if we could go build companies that would solve issues that maybe a company doesn't care about or an individual user doesn't really care about, but that the government really cares about and try to solve for their problems. So the first of those companies was a company called Flashpass. Essentially, what we do is we build software that helps governments lower unemployment rates. The U.S. government right now spends about $100 billion a year on various anti-unemployment initiatives. So things like social workers, workforce boards, community college subsidies, and like workforce training programs. And interestingly, less than 1% of that goes to any sort of online software solution. So we haven't applied any software, e-learning, digital to solving this problem. We're using the same budget for the last like 30 years. That basically hasn't changed. So that's a classic sort of example of an issue where when you think about who really cares about low levels of unemployment and people making a high income, it is the government. That's functionally one of the government's pure purposes. So the idea was, what if we could build software for whether it's like city governments or all the way to like foreign governments in entire countries to help them lower unemployment within their country or organization. And that was the thesis for Flashpass. We launched in Ohio last year. We did a pilot with about 2,500 people, and it was what the government calls a very small pilot, which was $4 million a year. So that's what selling the States is like. And so launched that in Ohio. We'll be up and live in at least 5 states this year. So we should do about $20 million in revenue this year. And we used the momentum from our Ohio pilot to raise a seed round a couple of months ago, which is how I think we got connected.
yeah.
We're also working on a project in stealth that I don't talk about publicly, but we're doing some really interesting stuff with audit technology for the government, which is very similar, selling directly to states. As I'm sure you guys have seen, there's a lot of concern about waste, fraud, and abuse right now. What people don't realize is the tech stack that these states are running their systems and audit systems on are like 25 years old. It's the same technology we used 25 years ago. Okay, so perfect. I think that my vision isn't necessarily to go. I think that there's both a lot of opportunity to be made in terms of like your tax dollars being more efficient and like you guys actually getting more value as U.S. citizens out of the taxes you're paying, but also a lot of money to be made by modernizing certain government systems because there really has been an aversion to private sector, but there also just hasn't been that many startups that have tried to actually solve government's problems. So the goal is hopefully, I can be the young 23-year-old that goes in and like teaches the government how to use technology. And if we're successful, make a couple $1 billion. And if we're not, it'll be a fun journey, and hopefully we'll still help some people along the way.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I think it's like you're like the first generation to say, "Hey, I want to do business with the government in a way,"
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of it has been very challenging. And obviously, when you talk about tax dollars and efficiency, I think great vertical to
Yeah.
go into. Maybe you could tell folks a little bit about the type of jobs that you're connecting people with at FlashPass, so they understand a little bit more what the government is focused on.
Um, it's really varied, but I think the general premise of the business is that like community college sucks, and that's like basically our solution to unemployment. So if you get unemployed, you have two options. You can either go on food stamps and get Medicaid and various social programs. The government tends not to like that because there's not like a maturity date, so they see that as very expensive. If someone is unemployed and they stay on social programs for longer than 3 months, they're very likely to stay on those programs for multiple years, if not for the rest of their life. So if someone that's unemployed can't find work within 3 to 4 months, that's basically going to probably cost the government about $1 million over like the next 5 to 7 year period. So the government has a very clear tendency to want to avoid that. What they do is they say, great, we're going to try to fund and put as many of those people through trade schools and community college and workforce programs as much as possible. And so you have this really interesting economic model where right now we send about $85 billion a year to various community colleges across the country to basically subsidize the cost of education. The problem is that the majority of that model sucks. Like you have to go drive for half an hour to go to sit in a classroom with like 55 other people. It's not very like time flexible. So if you have work or like whatever, you don't have reliable transportation, it's not on a bus route, like that sucks for you. Like good luck. And it's just not, there's no guarantee of a job at the end of the class. And oftentimes, the graduates we talk to, even if they are able to show up on time for 6 months and go get their credential, they are learning things that are sometimes 5 to 10 years behind market, like what employers want to see. And so it's a very inefficient model from a user experience standpoint, but it's also a very inefficient economic model because as a user, you still have to pay tuition, meaning that if I have no money because I got laid off, I still have to come up with $1,000 to go take this community college course. So it's not even economically efficient. So what we do is really simple. We put community college courses online. I know it sounds like very revolutionary, but it isn't. But no one's done it before in the sense of we go out, we build community college courses for in-demand jobs. So in Ohio, we have programming around the oil and gas industry. We have programming around cybersecurity. We have programming around semiconductor manufacturing, basically any industry that has over 300 open jobs in the state and is looking to fill those roles. And then we put them online and offer them through the trade schools. So the government funding that would go to trade schools, instead of having to go in person for a community college class, you could sign up online through Flashpass, do the course. And what's unique about our platform is we'll actually directly connect you with a job once you're finished as well. So you're guaranteed to at least get a handful of interviews. And so we're not seeing that typical like 40% job placement rate after you start. Our placement rate is a lot closer to 85% plus. So it's not cheap. I think that people sometimes hear the $4 or $5 million pilot. They hear about like we're going to ask the state of Ohio for $20 million next year, and they think that that's like a little bit. They get a little bit of sticker shock. But when you think about the fact that someone on social program benefits might cost the state at least $1 million, and you think about the fact that we're sending thousands and tens of thousands of users to our programming and we can prove that they're getting jobs, we're actually saving the state tens of millions of dollars in the long run through our program. And that's not something that most government services or most government vendors can say about their tech stack.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if anyone has any questions, just feel free to raise your hand. And let's go to you right now, Ray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the curriculum. Are you changing it a lot so that they are getting the jobs versus what they would have gotten just going to community college?
So we try to co-develop it with employers, which is a little bit unique. Meaning that if a hospital has 300 open jobs, we'll actually go to the hospital. We'll say, hey, what do you wish people knew that makes them not super effective in the first 30 days or 45 days of work? And can we pre-teach those skills? And then we'll film at the hospital. So at the hospital, it's things like HIPAA, how a hospital works. It's also like how to use Epic, which is a hospital CRM software that's super not intuitive. They'll actually come into the job interview then knowing all of those skills, and we'll actually film at that hospital. So like the hospital will open up, we'll bring a camera crew there, we'll create the content with them. Um, there's probably a question to be had around how often we want to develop the core, like update the course where it's still super relevant and it makes us money and we're not just burning a ton of excess capital. Honestly, we haven't been in business long enough, but our premise is the average community college course is updated every 5 to 6 years. So as long as we're updating it more frequently than that, we still have a competitive advantage.
That's great.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. With this as well, where do you think, like, why do you think that traditional e-learning platforms miss the mark? Do you think it's that feedback loop that you've created and that relationship with employers that makes your platform more compelling than, like, the old e-learning platforms that maybe some of us had in college and stuff?
I think that most private companies don't know how to sell to government. And so this is also like there are a lot of good audit software out there, but the government has not upgraded its audit software for 25 years. There's a lot of good e-learning platforms out there, but prior to Flashpass, no government has, state governments have bought across the board like e-learning software like we're building. And it comes to when you sell to government, B2B companies like to build a solution and then try to sell it to the government. And in general, government hates that. Like they want to feel like they're coming up with a solution or they're inventing something. They don't necessarily want to feel like intuitively like they're being sold something. So if you position it as, hey, you need to give a couple $1 million to a private company like Coursera, that's very unattractive to the government because they have like virtually no interest in writing a private company a large check for a couple $1 million. So what we do is a little bit more intuitive where we say, hey, we noticed that there were a lot of open oil and gas jobs in your state. We noticed that there's a high unemployment rate. We would love to partner with a few schools in your region to create an oil and gas careers jumpstart program and work with the state of Ohio to co-develop this to try to bring down the unemployment rate in your district, Mr. Congressman that's running for re-election this year. Like, how would you feel about doing that? We'd like your support to pass it. So it's a lot more of positioning it as these are net new programs and initiatives and we're just a contractor, a piece of the puzzle that's helping government execute against their objectives, than coming into a government and saying, hey, we built this thing to solve your problem. Go give us a lot of money.
So you're not like creating the programs, you're looking at what the need is and having that drive what you create?
We'll do both.
Okay.
But I think that it's very hard to create a program without a need. And I think that most companies, when selling to government, overemphasize their solution. And I think that you have to see the government as a co-development partner. So you can say that, hey, you have this problem. We would love to work with you on a solution and your stakeholders and your local schools or your local, that type of thing. I think it's the government has to feel like they're inventing it and they're just renting your technology or your scientists to build the thing. If you've already built the thing and they're buying it, the government would much rather spend $10 million to invent something than to spend $2 million in buying an existing solution. And that doesn't sound intuitive and it's not completely intuitive, but it is like realistically like how they think about it because they would rather create their own solution to a problem as legislators than go out and just write a big check to a private company they haven't vetted.
Is there a revenue share or a white label solution that they're asking for in terms of like the solution, or how does it matter in terms of?
I try not to think about it too
Yeah,
much.
yeah,
Um, ultimately, like again, like everyone gets into the nuances of like white labeling or the contracting vehicle. Yes, everything is done through some sort of vehicle in every
yeah,
state that we're in, whether it's the trade schools or a nonprofit, or for the audit software, like we have to be sold through Google Cloud Solutions because otherwise we can't. Anyways, it's a whole,
yeah,
and
yeah,
they take 20 to 30% of your fee, and they don't really do that much. But
yeah,
I think it's just like a necessary evil. I think that again, the approach that you have to approach it with is what can we do to get this done? Not like this contract. It's like, okay, you want to buy this thing. What's the easiest way to get this done? That's going to create the least amount of hurdles and the least amount of paperwork.
yeah.
A question I like to ask is, how could we get this done in the next 90 days instead of the next 9 months? It'll still probably take 9 months, but if you go into a 9 month process, it'll take 3 years, and by that time, that person might have left government, and then you're kind of like gone. So I think that framing it around like what's the easiest way to get this done and putting it to government is actually very helpful because they'll often have a preferred vehicle or a way that they want to contract it.
Got it. How many people are on your team right now?
Very small.
Really?
We try to keep revenue above $2 million a head.
Okay.
So we have 10 people on the team, and then we have like 30 different firms we contract with for government relations. But I think that in today's world of AI, there's no reason if you're building a tech company that like I'd say at least $1 million of ARR per head is probably like a good benchmark for like a truly leaner, efficient organization.
Got
We're
it.
all about efficient stewarding tax dollars.
Yeah. And are you technical as well?
Me?
Yeah.
Not at all.
Really?
No.
That's fine. Yeah. Do you go ahead, Eric?
I'm curious because obviously there's a lot of funds available, and my perception is there are also a lot of gatekeepers and owners of the relationships. So how do you navigate that, or how would we navigate that as someone who hasn't perhaps already established these relationships?
There's two things you can do. So you can rent them. There are lobbyists in every state. There's probably, I think, 50 in Ohio. I'd be surprised if there wasn't one in this room right now. Um, sorry to anyone who is a lobbyist. But so, you spend a couple grand a month and they'll typically open those doors and those relationships to you. We haven't had trouble finding lobbyists in states. It's been trouble finding the right one because everyone's a lobbyist. So it's like, okay, there's no way that all 100 of you have a close personal relationship with the governor. Like how do you actually kind of like separate the bullshit from like real people with relationships? But the problem is that requires capital. You guys have to spend thousands of dollars. It's very pay to play, and there's no guarantee of success. But what I found is that actually people in legislative offices and in government are pretty open-minded to like meeting with entrepreneurs and exciting solutions. It depends on the business environment in the state, but we live in a world of the Anduril and Palantir. Like government is consistently outsourcing more and more of its functions to private companies, and ultimately, everyone that got into government and started working there wants to make a difference, and they're there to make a positive impact. So if you pitch them with the email of like, "Hey, I'm a local entrepreneur, like in your state. I have an idea for a tool, or I've built a tool that I think will help make a really positive impact on the folks that the Department of Transportation serves." I've actually found it's not that difficult with that cold email to get a meeting with someone in the Department of Transportation, and then they might tell you who next to talk to, and you might have to take like 9 meetings to get in front of the right person. But I think that most folks in government, like if you frame it as, hey, we built something that helps your constituents or helps your residents, they're pretty open to hearing you out. It's not as closed door as you might assume.
A question for you. So you obviously have a ratio of job seekers to available jobs that exist out there is substantially going to be different, or going to be substantially high. How do you plan on approaching that from an angle of you've looked at where job openings are, or what industries there are right now, you have X amount of applicants that apply for that. Now you're pull through like a
Yeah.
student getting a position now, it has the potential of dropping. How do you plan on? Do you just plan on staying locked into what are the new industries that are opening up, or the new job opportunities that are developing out there, and then repositioning?
Yeah, I think so. I think that what we're trying to do is a pretty small arbitrage, right? Like, as I said, the US government currently spends $90 billion on the issue. That spending is probably going to double with like concerns around AI displacement and things like that. For us to be a multi-billion-dollar year revenue company, we don't have to help all the job seekers find all the jobs, where you're right, there could be way more job seekers than jobs. We just have to find, if we want to capture 1% of that revenue, we have to find a 1% arbitrage. Where can we help 1% of job seekers find, and maybe to your point, the ratio is 1.5% of all of the available jobs out there. So I think that, yeah, I think it's targeted industry. I think that, it can be overwhelming when you go on LinkedIn if you're looking for work and you were a lineman and you got injured on the job and now you need to find a job that doesn't require physical labor. You're going to get thousands of jobs and everything from cashiers to things you've never heard of. But if you go into a platform that says, hey, if you were a lineman, we can get you to be a quality assurance like engineer and work for a tech company making $45 an hour within 30 days, that's a much more guided career path, and that's something much more approachable. And then there's like classic sales too. Like, if we don't have enough employers, we hire people to go B2B and pitch us to employers. It's pretty easy because we say, hey, we saw you have a ton of jobs. We're free. We're state funded. It doesn't cost you anything. Can we send you some applicants? And they're like, sure. Same thing for employees. We go out and we run billboards and ads and we say, hey, like, if you're looking for work, there's a free state program to help you find a job in 30 days. And the marketing funnel isn't too difficult. So we can use marketing dollars to adjust either side of the funnel. But ultimately, we don't need to solve the entire problem. We need to solve 1% of the problem to make billions of dollars.
And that's a recursive cycle that will never go away, right? So you always have the job. It's not like you're going to fill every position that's out there.
Hopefully, yeah. And if it does, we've got like so many other problems to deal with. So
There you go.
Awesome. So just another follow up on what you just spoke to. So I have a very self interested curiosity
okay,
around what you said about the thought that this budget will double
yeah,
as a result of concerns around
yeah,
displacement. So I'm writing this book about
okay,
conscious disruption,
yeah,
preparing people who are 50 years old and above who are used to the old social contract. And
right.
my feeling is more jobs than many of us can predict are going to be displaced by
Mhm.
technology. So where are the funds coming from that will double? You know what I'm saying? So is it
Mhm.
going to be like military spending? But where would it?
So the U.S. government is very large. Our deficit is $30 trillion. The U.S. government spends more per month than we can even conceptually like wrap our heads around. There's a lot of data that shows if the number is too big, you can't understand how big it is. Like we can understand 100 million is 100 times larger than $1 million. I think we have a hard time understanding that a billion is 100 times larger than $10 million, like even intuitively as people. Um, there's a lot of space in a multi-trillion-dollar budget. But the other thing, and take this for what you will, I'm not making this a political commentary, but the policy of the US government for the last 15 years or so has been to spend money that it doesn't have at a deficit. So I don't think that where the money's coming from is actually a huge concern for the folks in Washington, D.C. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'd actually argue that, like, in the long term, that's not very sustainable. But I would say that, like, I don't think that if the U.S. government thinks that throwing more money at a problem is likely to reduce that problem, they don't typically have a very hard time finding that funding, for better or for worse.
So how large is this pool of entrepreneurs and people doing work for the government?
My gut is that it's very small, because when we went out to raise, we had $4 million of committed revenue. We had a clear like track record of if we got this $4 million, excuse me, we could go and expand to 20. And we probably met with 100 VC funds, and I'd say probably two-thirds, like initially right off the bat, were like, oh, this is government contracting. We don't touch government contracting. So I think that the pool is pretty small because there's not a lot of like capital interested. And like even when I asked for interest to other founders, we met with a lot of education, like ed tech founders. I probably know like 4 or 5 gov tech founders off the top of my head. But when you look at the most valuable privately held companies, right? SpaceX privatized the space exploration industry and NASA. Anduril is privatizing defense. Palantir is selling software to government. 3 of the 10 most valuable private companies are gov tech entrepreneurs. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I don't think that it's like very common. I don't know why. Probably a combination of people just don't think about working and selling to government unless they like work in government. But I'd say the pool is small. But if I had to guess, the billionaire or the multi, like 100 millionaire to founder ratio is actually very, very high in GovTech compared to something like B2B SaaS, which is so competitive and diluted.
It's a good breakdown. Yep.
Can you tell us about your first rollout and how that went? Like with a community college or like what was like the first one like, and how did you like lead up to it, set expectations, that sort of stuff? Or, you know.
I don't think we did. I think we pitched it as a pilot, and we're like, hey, we bet it's going to be cheaper than the typical community college experience. That was our goal. But I think that like under promise and over deliver is very important in government, because your end constituent has a boss they report to, and they want to walk in the governor's office and say, hey, this thing we spent $4 million on, it was 6 times more effective than we thought it would be. What they don't want to do is give them a big number of like, hey, we're going to help 10,000 people find jobs, and then when the governor asks about it, they have to turn around and say, oh, we only helped like 2,000 people. So I think that like we try to really minimize expectations. I think that, again, for better or for worse, $4 million is not a significant amount of number of money to the state. So I don't think they had any strong expectations going in. So there's an art, and we did this all the time at the marketing agency. Like if we felt reliably certain we were going to get them to 10 million views on TikTok, we'd always say we're going to get you 1 million views on TikTok, like in the first 90 days. There's definitely an art to anchoring the expectations very low as part of the sales process, and then like blasting through those expectations in the first 6 to 12 months. Because what we would do is we'd say, hey, like you got 1 million views on TikTok, told you you're going to get 1 million, you got 10 million views. if you doubled or tripled your TikTok marketing budget, I see a real pathway to you, getting 20 million views on TikTok. So that was like a natural way to upsell. So even though our initial sale was lower than we wanted, like we could pretty quickly get clients to double their budget. I think it's similar in government where initially we try to anchor them at the base case, like, hey, there might be like a couple hundred students on this, like, hey, we might get some companies to sign up, but we're trying something new. This is super progressive. We know you guys have funding for like new technologies, so like let's try this together. And then we were able to turn around and say, look, we have over 200 employers, we have like thousands of students, and that kind of creates that narrative of like momentum or success, which is valuable when selling into any like B2B enterprise org, not just government.
How do you, for anyone thinking about getting into government, how do you, I guess, navigate the bipartisan, conversation, or do you just don't bring it up? Does it matter, or do you kind of follow what their needs are? How do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest problems are typically bipartisan. Again, I say that not like the biggest policy issues, but the biggest issues. So things like national defense, things like like unemployment, things like waste and fraud. Like Democrats hate fraud, and like Republicans hate fraud.
Yeah.
Like ultimately we might have different approaches on how we go about certain things, but I think that fundamentally, like if the problem set is large enough, you can sell to both parties. I think that it's important not to overtly align your organization with one party, because then you're basically eliminating half of your total addressable market. And I just think that's stupid, because tides change. Your biggest state will probably, through the lifetime of them being a customer of you, will change parties like 2 or 3 times. And even the more politically agnostic you can be as a brand or as an organization, the better. Or more practically, if you're better funded, the best thing you can do is create like 2 super PACs and then create a blue super PAC and a red super PAC and just donate to both candidates. Like that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah. Well, no, I like that. Just for, the level of focus on the problem that you're solving, and even from the fundraising, it's very milestone oriented. So hopefully, folks are picking that up. Any other questions? Because I want to get back to the networking as well. I know we've had some late walk-ins. Anything, Jeff?
So I missed the very first. So as far as the government being a customer, because they want things, and hopefully we're helping them invest money rather than spend money.
Mhm.
As taxpayers, it's not about whether it's a billion or 1,000. If it's going to something good, it's investment. If it's just being thrown away, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I missed part of your premise initially on what you.
Why don't I fill you in after
Yeah.
this 101? That way we don't make everyone sit through the the first part again. But happy to, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, I tend to do more work on government with grant programs and things like that.
Yeah.
There's certainly, it's a very big company, and they spend a lot of dollars.
Yeah.
And anytime you can help them spend it on things that give good returns to them and to the partners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more, we talked about this at the start, but the more taxpayer dollars we can save, if we can tie it to like true savings and like unlock, that's probably like the North Star for any government business.
Well, look, it's 2 ways. Either selling government is like selling healthcare. Either it's a true savings or you generate additional wealth.
Mhm.
One of the two. Either you solve a problem or you create a new value.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and Jeff has a record for Ohio most TVSF wins. So
Nice.
yeah, he can tell you about that. Well, Emil, thank you for coming out. Just a couple questions. Is it free for anyone, the curriculum online? Is that
It's not free for governments.
not free for government?
But
Okay, yeah.
it's free for any job seeker or anyone who's just curious and checking out the platform.
Okay.
And then it's free for any employer to hire off of the platform as well if they
Okay.
have like employment needs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anything you want to share with folks? Thanks for coming by. Anything else you want to share?
No, guys, thanks for taking the time. And if there's anything I can do to be helpful, whether on the fundraise side, as I said, we talked to about 100, 120 different VC firms in a month, which I know is like high volume, especially for Ohio, because I think there's like 4 or 5 here in Ohio. So happy to, provide context there, or even, on the B2B side, I spent some time in B2B, and although it wasn't the largest exit, I think we had the chance to work with everyone from celebrity brands like in LA to like, big Fortune 50 companies and sell contracts to them. So just let me know how I can be helpful.
How were you able to get some of them, those like the big names?
Well,
Like
I was
how?
like 18.
Yeah.
I just tell them. I just like cold email them.
Just cold email.
Yeah, I'd be like, hey, like other 18-year-olds are on TikTok. Like you've probably never heard of it, but like your kids have. You know, like you want
Yeah.
to go get on it.
So you like onboarded them to TikTok for the most part.
I mean, yeah. So the less interesting story here, the true story is, one of our first customers. We sent a ton of cold emails out to like local businesses in the Cincinnati, like Columbus region. One of my first customers was a company called Cow. They're a big like CPG company. They sell like deodorant and like soap, you know, through Kroger. But they're Japanese based, but they had like their U.S. headquarters was in Cincinnati. It's like, hey, we want to do this TikTok thing. They said, sure, come in for a meeting. We went up to a meeting like this, like 57th floor, I remember. It was a 60-floor building. Got in a conference room. There's a lot of people that like dressed like Jeff there. I was in my t-shirt and jeans, like I didn't know any better. And they said, okay, so like where's your deck? I said, what's a deck? And that's like about how well that meeting went. But ultimately, they decided to hire us, probably because we quoted them $2,000 a month to run TikTok across this like Fortune 50 company that had like a $200 million marketing budget. They're like, whatever. That campaign went really well. Like My Curé soap, it was like soap that came out in the shape of like a flower. Like that was the product. So went super viral on TikTok. Ultimately, Procter and Gamble took notice because they were also in town, and My Curé was their biggest competitor. And they said, "Hey, we'd love to see you work across the P&G brands." And then from there, across P&G, we had a pretty sizable retainer, and we were able to hire actual agency salespeople and like business dev reps that could go in and get us meetings and pitch us. But we'd go in, and so that was the typical track. But I mean, I think fundamentally, like everyone has something that they're insecure about, whether it's your age and you feel less experienced, or a lack of a specific background or anything. And what was really helpful with Candid is we could have easily said, we don't know as much as these people. I've never worked at a company, period, like much less built an agency. But I think what was really helpful is we would go in these bake-offs with other marketing agencies, and they literally make you like pitch them back to back. So they like sit you in a room and like you have to sit on a couch next to all these guys. And I would point to them and I'd be like, hey guys, I'm like, you gotta want to trust this guy to run your TikTok. He doesn't even have a TikTok on his phone. Like, do you want someone that looks like him, or do you want someone that looks like me, to like talk to other 18-year-olds? And that was really super effective. A lot of companies ended up hiring us, and we didn't make a lot of friends in the marketing industry, but it was a good way, I think, to like lean into the age as an advantage versus a disadvantage. And same thing for government. We say like, hey, like maybe we talk to it all the time. I'm like, hey, I'm a baby. I'm like, I grew up with a smartphone. Like I had a smartphone ever since I was 2 years old. I'm like, this internet stuff works, and like, just trust me on it. Like, let us build it for you. So I think trying to lean into that, like, yeah. So that was the way. I forget the original question, but that was the way we got those initial sales. And then once you have P&G and a few logos, like it's a lot of networking and just being a character and flying to random places. And
yeah, Cincinnati's a great city for marketing. We appreciate advertising, I think, just because of P&G.
Yeah, totally. P&G still should have bought us. I think they wasted a ton of money by not buying us, but that's kind of them.
The last quick intro I had before I left the rep one meeting with somebody, a woman that was pitching that she started a company that's combining AI and VR to train recent graduates, college students how to work in companies.
Yeah.
The basic skills that they.
I would love to talk to her or him.
Yeah.
That could be interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's do it.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.